I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I know that when I announced these roundtables, this was probably one of the more highly anticipated ones because rules and judging, as we know, is a hot topic that is probably the most discussed thing in the combat robotics world. But I have a great panel here to kind of discuss this topic and unpack a lot of these things. So just everybody, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves. I know that, a couple of the people here, people are going to know who they are, but just for the sake of doing this. So Mike Jeffries, please introduce yourself.
All right, I'm Mike Jeffries. I've been competing at robot events since 2004, attending for a few years prior to that. I'm currently working as the match steward for BattleBots and doing some consulting work for the NHRL, particularly related to judging criteria and rules development.
Yes, which is what this is all about. So this is perfect. Mike Hall.
Yeah, I'm Michael Hall. I'm one of the board members of the MRCA, the Midwest Robotics Combat Association. We're primarily doing ant weights there. But we are looking to move into overseeing beetles and keeping rankings for all of our local events there. So
Awesome. Connor.
Hey, I'm Connor. I'm a builder from New Zealand. Been doing it for 6 years now, starting out in, ant weight. So that's UK ants, 150 grams, then beetles, and now into feathers, and who's to say there isn't heavyweight on the cards coming up. So, but yeah, just been getting right into the space. So for the past, slowly ramping up for the past 6 years. So yeah.
Excellent. And David.
Hey, I'm David Calkins. I've been involved in the sport since 1998. Was a judge for BattleBots back in the Comedy Central days. Helped co-author the RFL rule set after BattleBots went away and there were all those RFL events, and founder and runner of RoboGames.
Very cool. Well, we definitely have a lot to talk about on the rules and judging. I mean, I think that, over time, at least when we look at some of the, like BattleBots and the more well-known leagues, that those rules and the judging criteria has changed a lot over time, has come a long way. I'm sure that's also the case with, ant weights. Everything has to kind of be reevaluated and evolve and whatnot. But, we definitely have some specific things to talk about. Now, one of the first questions that I got, I think typically more pertains to the heavyweights, because at the lower weight classes, you don't see this as an issue, but the out of the arena. So this was something that was, has been a hot topic with BattleBots. There's people that love having out of the arena as an option, that you can win that way. So, other people don't like it. The question that was asked was, can we bring that back? And if we bring that back, how do we do that in a safe way? Because obviously there's, the safety concerns that come with that sort of thing. So I'll go to you first, Mike. What do you think about that? And, is there a safe way to do it?
So I'm personally a fan of having some sort of out of the arena area, not the whole arena or like major portions of it, but some piece of the arena where you can get someone to and eliminate them, because that opens up the kind of bots that can be competitive and can win by a knockout. There are some safety concerns you have to deal with, though. So wherever a robot can land in the arena needs to be resistant to the robot escaping from it. So you don't necessarily want to have, your main combat area be the only bit that's tombstone proof. Because if tombstone gets thrown outside of that and is starting to chew through your door, suddenly your referee's ankles are now a valid target, and that's not a good thing. So putting it out of the arena zone and back into a heavyweight scale arena is going to require a lot of thought and effort. And there's some element of it that's still in place, but getting it to be a major feature has some safety challenges.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any specific input on that?
I'd say it tends to be self-selecting. That is, and using Mike's example of Tombstone, if it goes over the bumpers, I mean, everybody in my experience will always power down their weapon trying to get back out. And usually it's a KO or a TKO anyways, because the robot can't move on that side, with the exception of Matt Maxim, who could always make Sewer Snake do the most amazing things. Even when he was tossed over the bumpers, he'd still manage to get out. So basically on the RoboGames side, if you're over the bumpers, we just need controlled movement, just like if you're inside the regular arena, and then it's just a 15-second countdown to be an out. So I mean, I would say that every part of every arena, needs to be as safe as feasible, and just work within, the robots you've got, and always presume that if it can happen, it will.
That's true. And I'm also curious to hear from you, Mike and Connor, on this, and to kind of add in there too. I mean, currently the smaller bots typically don't have an outside of the arena area because it's more of a box. But is that something, like, I've actually heard people say they wish that there was like something that where they could get the bot out of the actual driving space. Is that even something that could be done in the future?
Yeah. So in the Midwest, there's an event called Horde. They have their box on an 8x8 table, but the inside is a hexagon or an octagon. Sorry. They cut off two of the corners, so they're cut at a 45, but they're flat, and then two of them have outside out of the arena areas versus having a pit. So they still have the full cage around the whole box, but they still have the ability to have an outside of the arena for that event. And obviously that's much more feasible on a smaller scale. You're not going to have BattleBots building an octagon arena anytime soon. But yeah, so I mean, they have those. We have pits in a number of the arenas that open after a certain amount of time, which are obviously is a lot. Like, it doesn't need anywhere near the build up for the 1 and 3 pound bots as it does for the 250 pound bots. So
Yeah. Connor, any thoughts?
Much the same as Mike Jeffries there on that. I believe that there should be specific areas to show robots that can achieve that out of the arena, but got to show that control and direct the opposition to that area, not just smack a robot out anywhere and it's out. And down here for our newer arena, everyone's got pits here too, which I don't believe a lot of the state or the ones in the States have. But so kind of one thing we did, because we do subscribe to that and do quite like that, is the pit was actually off the side of the arena, and it was never fully enclosed, so that during a match, even down in beta weight scale, you've still got that option to be able to OOTA someone, but then the wall disappears and then it turns itself into a regular pit off one side. It just provides a bit more fun, but also provides that option that if you've got a really dominant vert during the match, you've got that option to safely put someone into the arena and get that TKO immediately.
Yeah, I do know outside of the States that people are big fans of pits. I personally am a big fan of those as well. It's an interesting option for sure. Now,
Rob and Rob up in Seattle with War, they always have pits in their arenas, which are used quite well, and it's not a straight drop off. There's actually a little bit of a lip there, so you have to get over the lip to push the people in the drop off zone. And you get some really good chaotic fights up at War in Seattle. And I mean they're running 2 or 3 arenas at a time, so it's a great 3-ring show.
Yeah, I think the way they handle their pits is really nice because it reduces the chances of just a random bounce putting you into the pit. But if your opponent is controlling you well, they can take you into the pit, throw you in there. So it makes it a little bit more of a skill thing versus purely a like bad bounce, sorry, your luck ran out sort of moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now I always like to start off these roundtables with one of the heavier questions early, because this is probably one of the biggest debated thing when it comes to rules is those who say that there needs to be a better balance in the rules to accommodate for non-spinners and to give different types of robots a better chance to be competitive. I mean, not that this is necessarily a rule, but a feature, you know, I would say like the shelf at BattleBots is one of those things that a lot of people say gives vertical spinners a massive advantage. You know, I'm just curious to hear thoughts on like, do you think that when we're looking at rules that we need to consider trying our best to not give a specific type of robot an advantage or disadvantage because of that? Or should it just be based on, you know, what we think are the best set of rules, regardless of what that might do to a specific type of robot? So
I
go
would
ahead.
I would start by saying that it's kind of a myth that spinners always rule. In the 20 years of doing RoboGames, Ray has never finished first once. Gary Jin for RoboGames, its Original Sin, and in BattleBots, what's he called it? Yeah, free shipping. And then Matt Maxim, who has the most wins of anybody, with Sewer Snake, which is not even a real flipper; it's just sort of a manipulative arm. And you know he'd cook Ray all the time. So my take on it is leave it alone because it isn't true that spinners always win. You got to be prepared for them. You know, you got to build to know that kind of impact is going to hit you. But just speaking historically, it's a fallacy that spinners always win.
Yeah, I think I'd agree there. And one of the trends I've been seeing the last couple of years in particular with damage criteria that I think has been kind of a soft nerf to spinners is the switch from damage criteria being kind of subjective to being a lot more of an objective criteria, where if you look at the NHRL criteria, there's the different damage levels they've got that spell out, you know, if you've taken this kind of damage, you're at this level. If you've taken that kind of damage, you're at that level. So the hurdle to get over to actually score all the points in damage is much, much higher than some of the criteria where it's like, all right, this robot did damage, that robot didn't do damage, they get all the damage points. And I think that's shifted a lot of that balance where even if you're building something that's got a big kinetic weapon, you've got to win some control points, you've got to win some aggression points, unless you're completely obliterating your opponent. So that's kind of the point of the big spinner bots, though, is you're either going to win by obliterating your opponent or maybe you manage to outdrive them. But that's where the control bots can come in and get the fight, is if they don't fall apart and they're on top on aggression and they're on top on control, they've won the fight, period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think if anything, this past season of BattleBots has taught us that, you know, these other types of robots do have the ability to win and, you know, just do things that maybe other people think that they can't. Definitely a lot of meta breaking happening there. Connor, your thoughts on the topic?
I think we have to be fairly careful here as well on the fact of, and it ties in quite closely with the arena, that if the arena is just a steel box and there's no way out, there's no way for a control bot, say, to get a TKO on a you know, a vert, say, then he's just stuck in there for 3 minutes, and then he's got to win every single control and aggression point to win that match. If there's a bit more of a, if kind of circling back around to pit, say, or an out of the arena area, then they've got a bit more of a chance to, a bit more of a leg up on that aspect. If you're in an arena like the BattleBots where you are outruling out of the arenas, then I think there just needs to be a bit more of consideration, on that. Maybe that damage isn't weighted, as crazy as the control and aggression. Maybe it is evened up a bit more. That allows those control bots to at least, give up a few points here and there, so that they're not, just stuck in a steel box for 3 minutes and just having to tank every single hit pretty much, and then still display all the control and all the aggression to win on the slim chance. I quite like control bots, but I obviously understand it for TV show, especially since it is a reality TV show to some extent, there's got to have that excitement. But to completely nerf those styles of bots, then removes all sorts of diversity, and it starts to become a bit of a interesting predicament at that point, right? Where everyone's just a vert or and the odd horizontal or whatnot. So
yeah, Connor hit on a good point where BattleBots is a TV show. They're looking for those big hits. If there is lots of out of the arenas, or they threw a pit in there instead of a shelf or something like that, those are going to be possibly shorter matches. There aren't going to be as many big hits. It just won't be necessarily as entertaining for TV or the live crowd. On the local scale where anybody can sign up, there's no applying to get into the competitions. Making the rules so that it can be as fair between whatever variety or flavor of bot anybody wants to run. I think it's super important to try to, the more variety of bots, the more fun it's going to be. The less it's going to be a rock paper scissors. It's going to be rock paper scissors, and then 3 other types of variety that you can't necessarily plan for. So
yeah, I think one thing that's been kind of touched upon in bits and pieces here is that to a pretty big degree, you can define the meta for your event by how you build your arena and how you set your judging criteria. Different judging criteria is going to motivate people to build their bots in a different way because you're changing the win conditions. Building your arena with or without a push out or with or without a pit is going to change the win conditions. If you look at events over in the UK, there's an entire style of flipper you don't really see in the US because their arenas suit that design better than ours do. And if you look at the US, one thing that's become very popular is specifically compact vertical spinners, because people have figured out that they can be built in a very durable way that not only does damage, but is also very capable of controlling a fight, because you're getting smaller hits than a big horizontal spinner would get, but you're getting them more consistently in a more predictable manner. So you can stay on top of your opponent at speed and just batter them around the arena repeatedly. And that's partially an arena design issue where you've got a big flat arena, nothing really to get in the way. And these fast, aggressive vertical spinners are able to just dominate in that kind of environment sometimes.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I wanted to make sure that I brought up, because I think this is a very, highly discussed thing, is I think for most people, when they look at the typical judging criteria, they understand what damage means. Well, sometimes we'll get into that. They tend to understand more what control means. Again, there's a little bit of deviation there, but I think for some reason, the thing that confuses the most people is aggression. Because I've had a couple people say, well, what is that? Because if you're using your weapon, that's damage. So what is aggression? And I'm just curious to hear from each of you what, obviously there's there are judging manuals, as I just judged NHRL last month, so I know what it's defined as. But for you personally, what do you think aggression looks like apart from it just being damage from the weapon? So I'll go ahead and start with Mike Jeffries.
All right, so I'm going to kind of go through the three categories just to kind of summarize it. So damage is what happened. Control is who's dictating the pace. And aggression is who's creating engagements. So control and aggression are actually pretty closely related. And I think there's some events where you kind of see a merging of the two categories as a single one. So with some of the Brazilian events, they only use damage and aggression as their criteria. And I think there have been periods where some North American events have done similar. I don't recall if RoboGames did that for a while, but I think they may have. And it's one of those things where you're essentially changing it into the two categories balancing against each other, but aggression is also control because they are so closely related. And it is a much more subjective criteria than damage, which is part of, I think, why people have issues judging it. One thing I've seen that's kind of interesting is the Brazilian events, at least some of them, have a much more objective aggression criteria where the judges are actively tracking who's hitting, when they're hitting, how much they're hitting, and they're keeping a tally of which bot creates more hits during a fight and scoring aggression based off of that. And I don't know if it's the right answer, but it's certainly an interesting one. The way I view aggression is if you're the person who is consistently on the attack, that's aggression. And that's very different from dictating the pace of the fight because control can be offensive or defensive. Aggression is the offensive side purely.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen bots have a weapon that is down, and I would still consider them being aggressive because they're actively trying to engage, even though they don't have an active weapon. So that's a great, point to bring up. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
So to Mike's point, yes, RoboGames does use only aggression and damage, but we weigh aggression more heavily than damage. Like damage can be a tie. So it can be a 3-3 split. Whether there's no damage at all or whether both bots are totally destroyed, you can still have a tie. And we define aggression as an intentional motion to inflict damage on the other robot. And damage only counts if you are being aggressive. So if Ray, for example, is just sitting there with his spinner and not doing anything, and Gary comes at him, even if Gary's scoop is ripped off, Ray doesn't get any damage points because he wasn't initiating that fight, which of course becomes subjective because some judges, not to mention the audience, will see that and they'll say, oh, that should totally count as damage, because Ray was being aggressive or not. And so like back in the original BattleBots days, there was strategy, which everybody kind of threw out because it's just like regular war. Strategy is great until the first shot gets fired, and then everything goes out the window. And in my experience, and I've seen 5,000 matches at least. I mean, when I was judging in the early aughts and traveling around the country and the world, I had this engineer's notebook, and I stopped at 2,200 fights, and I'd record every fight, including comments like, use strategy, think about who you're attacking or why, and I'd comment on every fight. Which then became Judge Dave's Guide to Winning of 10 rules that I have, unofficial rules of this is how you build your best competitive robot. But it also factored into rewriting the rules for RoboGames. And if you read the RoboGames rules at the very end, section 17 lists how judges are supposed to rate both aggression and damage.
Yeah. Connor?
It's one of those things, isn't it? Aggression and control. A lot of people, get them confused, and it is, depending on what event you're at, it is very it changes from place to place and judges' interpretation, so it is quite a difficult thing. But yeah, it kind of comes down to the same thing as everyone else. It's more intention, I think, than you can have the control aspect, and you're dictating the pace of the match, and then aggression kind of comes down to the intention to use your, could be your active weapon or your wedge, or and you're intentionally creating those interactions with the other robot. Now it has to be, you got to be pretty careful here again as well, because I've seen a lot of people define it as use of active weapons, but then not every competition has active weapons. There are sportsman competitions, so it's very, or people that just enter regular wedges with a weapon in name only kind of, and it's so having just explicitly saying intention to use active weapon is a bit it starts to disadvantage those robots there as well. So it's, I think, just flat out, just in one word, just intention to, and that's in my head, that's all I come back to every time I'm trying to judge a match.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with everybody was saying. It's very subjective, and then that's one of the, with it being very objective or subjective. That's one of the reasons why we, as the MRCA, we actually have a scorecard and judging criteria, and we break down what's a 5-1 or 4-2, like what does that look for aggression, control, and damage. We try to spell it out very clear, because a lot of the local competitions don't have seasoned roboteers and stuff like that. Could be somebody's dad, it could be co-worker and stuff like that, and they're like, oh yeah, I like watching BattleBots, I'll judge for you for a day. It's hard to get people in to volunteer to sit around and watch a 8x8 box for 12 hours. So you kind of take what you can get. So having this, I think we're looking at doing some example fights. We're gonna take some video recordings and be like, hey, how would you judge this fight? This is kind of what everybody collectively agrees how the fight should have gone, and just making it easier for people too. And this is also super good for competitors. They could go in here and be like, they can look through the rules and criteria and be like, hey, okay, this is how I have to drive, this is the way I need to go.
Since when do contestants look at the rules?
You can hope. I mean, we don't try to use too big of words and stuff, but yeah, that's I'm sure we'll probably get into it, is people not necessarily reading the rules, or rules not being very clear and open to interpretation, and then people do things and are like, hey, that's not legal, that's fair. I'm like, well, the rules say it actually is, or don't say you can't do it. So but yeah, it's super helpful.
If you look at Seattle's war competitions, for all of their judging, it's strictly thumbs up, thumbs down. That they'll have 3 judges, and there's no point scoring. It's strictly that one won, red square won, blue square won, things like that. I think that's too far the other direction. But everybody needs to run their event their own way.
Somewhere in between those two, one thing we were trialing down here was still having the 3 categories, but it was just, okay, red square 1 damage, red square 1 control, blue square 1 aggression kind of thing. And it's somewhere kind of halfway between. We saw some good results with that, but obviously then, yeah, you do lose a little bit of nuance there. But
and that sort of thing could tie into that kind of criteria. You basically decide which 2 categories you'd want to build for. So that's one of those things where going with that style of judging influences the way people are designing for your event, the way people are competing at your event. And to touch on one of Dave's points a few moments ago, is when I was introducing myself to all the builders this season, one of the things I said is, now, I know you've all taken the time to review the rule changes for this year, but just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to go over them.
Good for you.
You never know.
It's actually funny on that point. So we're in our trip to Brazil. So Ray and Mark Strakin and I are going to Brazil to play hockey. And the Brazilian hockey rule set was only in Portuguese, so I translated it using Google Translate, which was good enough. And then I happened to ask Paolo one question about the rules. He goes, "Oh my God, David, it's the one rule set I don't translate because no Americans are going to come here to compete at hockey, and everybody's telling me I should translate them to English, and I don't. And you, David, you got to be the one who actually reads the rules." I'm like, well, I kind of want to make sure that our robots aren't breaking any. But I finished translating them and I cleaned it up, and so now the rules are in English as well as Portuguese.
That's hopeful.
There can be stuff lost in translation between languages and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely. Like currently for RoboGames, I am in the process of translating all of our rule sets into like 10 different languages for the majority of the contestants. And I'm just getting native speakers who've competed to do that so that they can translate it well as a native speaker, but if they've competed, they also know those nuances and what gets meant.
And the intent behind the stuff too.
Yeah.
I'd put good odds if you went to any event, any robot combat event anywhere in the world, and you handed out a test on the rule set. The builders that were in their first to third event would probably score higher than anyone else.
Ray, do you read the rules?
They're the only ones that read the recent ones.
I do.
Ray reads the rules.
I read the
rules. Now there were fans that had a couple of super specific questions. So we'll talk about them just to get, clarification. So one thing that was asked was that there are many instances where one bot loses a weapon or their drive or something like that. And the fan was curious, depending on the timing of when that happens in a match, does that impact the judging, or like, should it impact the judging based on when in the match that happens?
I would say, first of all, and this is in our rules, is that you judge all 3 minutes of the match. Not just, and this is very hard for judges to do, all judges, because it's very human nature. I'm not criticizing everybody. I think it's just human nature. Is you really only tend to focus on the last minute of the match, and a lot of people, judges and fans alike, forget the first 2 minutes because it's such an intense experience. So to answer your question, we judge by all 3 minutes. So like if the weapon falls off at the 2-minute 30 mark, that only counts for 1/6 of the event. And also, why did the robot fall apart? Did it fall apart because Ray smashed the living shit out of it, or did it fall apart because you didn't screw stuff down well enough as a contestant, or you just built a crappy robot? And I have seen countless robots enter the arena and die without ever having been touched by the other robot. And so, it's very much case by case basis of how did the damage occur, when did it occur, and how does it affect the robot? I mean, God, just think about all of the people whose batteries go up, where it takes out the robot, but the other robot, their competitor wasn't responsible for the batteries cooking off. And that gets really hard to judge that, because you're like, okay, so how, if the fire robot was being really aggressive, even though he cooked himself and the other robot was just avoiding him, don't you want to give it the win to the guy whose robot is now a piece of charred residue?
And I'm pretty sure that's the Robot or the RoboCore Black Dragon strategy. It's like, set yourself on fire, keep after the opponent until they just shock themselves to death. Recency bias is a really nasty thing when you're judging, because you do remember the last bit of the fight way more clearly than the middle of it. Like, I've talked to builders about their fight, and they remember maybe the start, the middle's kind of fuzzy, and then the last 30 seconds they've got a pretty clear picture of. And that's just kind of how it goes. And whether or not, or when something happens in the fight, how it impacts the rest of the match is really going to be down to the criteria. So if you look at the NHRL criteria, one of the things that's a bit of a quirk with aggression is, with their active weapon rules, they prioritize use of an active weapon when it comes to scoring aggression. So if your weapon dies 30 seconds into the fight, it's harder to score aggression for the rest of the match because of that. But the other side of it is, it doesn't really matter when your weapon dies when it comes to damage, because it's looking at the state of the bot at the end of the fight. Is the weapon still there? Is it still working? Yes. Okay. Or is it dead? All right. When it happens, when it comes to damage, doesn't matter. And then control is entirely independent of that. But it's one of those things where how the criteria is written dramatically impacts how much something like that weighs on the judges.
Yeah. Mike or Connor?
I think, yeah, most things have been said, right? If your damage is, comes at the 30-second or at the 2-minute 30 seconds, it's still damage. In my eyes at least, it's just, like, it just makes it harder for you to win the aggression or control section if the front end of your robot's, up in flames, or your weapon, everything's bent out of shape. It makes it harder to score the rest of the match. So I don't necessarily think it impacts the damage category as much as it would impact you in the other categories, right?
As a judge, one of the most controversial decisions I was ever part of back in the BattleBots Comedy Central era, Xander and Reason had built Toro, which was a 350-pound flipper, going up against Brian Nave with Shredderator, which was a full-body spinner. And I think Reason was driving. Reason hit Brian once, and it really skewed the leveling of the robot, and so it was gyrating all over the floor. But Brian was constantly moving towards Reason to try and hit them, and Xander and Reason just kept playing hide and go seek, and refused to engage and refused any aggression past that first 10 or 15 seconds. And all three judges gave it to Brian, because while there was significant damage, they utterly lost on aggression and strategy. And I remember Xander just tearing into me and Greg at the judges table. And Greg looks at him and says, "Well, what was your strategy?" And Xander replied, "To stay away from the other robot." And Greg looks at him and goes, "And would you call that a good strategy?" And that was the end of that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So another specific question. You would think these were related to specific matches. I have a feeling.
They probably are.
So the other very specific question was that when there's a big hit, and the bot that's been hit, whether they recover immediately or whether it takes them a few seconds or even longer to recover from that hit. How is that scored currently? And, or is there any thought into, like, should it be scored a different way? That was the question.
For me, if I was judging that fight, I would not score it differently. A big hit, whether it happens 5 seconds in or 2 minutes and 55 seconds in, if you practically destroy the other robot, damage is damage, and it really doesn't matter when it happened. That would be my take.
I think they're more so saying, like, the recover. So, like, let's say there's a hit, and, like, either the bot immediately is fine, or, like, they're kind of wonky for a few seconds and then they
Right.
recover.
So I think on aggression, it's going to be scored the same. A lot of the current rule sets for judging specifically call out that taking time to stabilize and spin up again doesn't count against you when it comes to aggression. Now, if your opponent's able to recover and start attacking again faster, they may be able to start scoring aggression again more quickly, but it's not going to be a negative for you to stabilize after a big hit and then start attacking again.
I agree.
Now, it could start negatively impacting your control if you get a big hit and then spend the next minute pinballing around the arena before you're able to finally settle down and start attacking again. Because at that point, you're really clearly demonstrating that you don't have control. And if your opponent is chasing you down while you're pinballing here, they're going to be getting a lot of aggression points. They're potentially going to be getting control points. And that's not even touching on the damage you may be doing to yourself, which a lot of criteria now is damage. So who does the damage doesn't matter. Because trying to litigate, oh, this bit of damage is because we ricocheted off and hit the wall, but you ricocheted off of them, so that you did sort of cause it. And trying to argue who's specifically responsible for that particular bit of damage just gets really tedious.
Yeah, I agree. Like if somebody gets if a large hit happens to another bot, and it takes 15 seconds for the bot that get hit to regain its composure and get driving, and the bot that hit it doesn't capitalize on that, it's not going to hurt them if they just sit there, but they're giving up free points for control, aggression, and damage. So
I'm always surprised when contestants do that. You know, it's like, hey man, this is a fight. Every split second you should be attacking the other guy.
Yep. Like, yeah, it won't negatively affect either bot, but it will, you're just giving up free additional points for possibly other categories. So it could depending on what you do after that hit, it could actually negatively affect you if you don't capitalize on it.
Yeah, I've seen it happen so many times. So, okay. Well, now that we've got those super specific questions out of the way, there's 3 other areas that I know are hot topics that, that people wanted to have brought up. So 2 of them are rules that are currently in place for one level of competition and not in the other. And then the other one is just kind of something that seems more net new. So the first one is, now BattleBots has the challenge rule, which Mike is very familiar with, being the match steward. So, the lower levels don't have this. And I'm sure at this point in time, a big reason for that, especially NHRL, is that there's so many matches that if you let everybody have a challenge, it would really drag out the day. But at the same time, I've definitely seen matches where after I've watched it and heard the judging decision come back, I'm like I don't know how they arrived at that conclusion, but that's definitely wrong. Is there a way that we can institute that at lower levels of robot competition without dragging the competition out because everybody's challenging matches?
I guess I'll start here since I'm pretty intimately familiar with the question. And I have actually talked with some folks about the practicalities of an appeal system at events where you've got a much tighter schedule. And that is the big problem. So when we're doing an appeal at BattleBots, the first couple of appeals took hours to get through because the team would announce their appeal, and then I'd go talk to them after the session was over. Then I'd go meet with the judges. We'd review the footage. The judges make their decision. So there could be a 3-hour gap, 4-hour gap between when the appeal starts and when it finishes. On TV, it's 5 minutes, maybe. Towards the end of the event, we got it narrowed down quite a bit, but it would still take, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And when you're at an event where you're guaranteed a 15-minute or a 20-minute repair window, that appeal could eat up the entirety of that window. So it's a tough thing. I don't know if there's a great way to implement appeals at fast-paced events. And from a practical standpoint, unless it's a very high-pressure event, I'm not sure there's much reason to. I compete at Dragon Con robot battles pretty much every year. And an appeal system there would feel kind of silly because we're all just there to put on a good show and have some fun. And like, there's been decisions where I disagreed with them, but that's the nature of the sport. Is it's judging fights. Are judges always going to get it right? No. Am I
It's
always
just like
gonna agree with
it's
judges?
just like
No.
baseball. You can't expect an umpire to make every call a perfect call. The umps are going to slip. And you're right. It is human nature, and people are going to disagree. And for me, I don't want an appeal system. It's just like Matt Maxim said: if it goes to the judges, I should lose. And that's always Matt's rule: is he always wants to win by knockout.
Yeah, I know I take a similar approach when I'm competing. Is if at the end of the fight the judges aren't sure that I've won, that's my fault.
Ray's nodding in agreement over there.
There's also the question of logistics as well, right? So you're talking about BattleBots where it's all filmed, and maybe NHRL where it is all filmed too. But if you're going down to local events where it's all in person, then if you're asking the judges who judged immediately after they saw the event, it's still fresh in their minds, that's going to be their most accurate to what they thought at the time. Whereas if you give them half an hour, if you ask me what I did half an hour ago, or like to judge every nuance of a match that was half an hour ago, 15 minutes ago, it's gone. And so without that ability to go back at all those local events is, you're going to get an even more weird result.
At that point,
It's-
if you don't have a way to go back and review the fights, there's 0 point to having an appeal, because you're not going to be able to remember the fight more clearly half an hour later than you are right after the fight's happened. I think in general, it's better to try to create a situation where the judges are more readily able to make the correct call than to try to worry about putting in an appeal system. So where you tend to see issues come up most is going to be in damage, where two judges may see, oh, hey, their weapon was dead. One judge may think it wasn't. And if all the judges know that the weapon was actually working, then that's going to be a more accurate score and it'll be better. And there's no reason to appeal at that point because they made the right call to begin with.
Yeah, the appeals work for BattleBots because they have the time between matches. Local events, it won't happen. I haven't talked to anybody in the board, but I'll say that MRCA won't ever have appeals anywhere in the near future. But it's like appeals just won't work on a local scale. You have a hard enough time getting people to actually be ready in the 15 or 20 minutes between matches. If you start slowing things down and then tying up the judges with other things where they can't actually judge the current fight, it just slows everything down. If you want trying to be more accurate, the next best thing would be get 5 judges instead of 3. You're gonna go and average out the scores a little bit more than that, more than just the 3. But then you just got to try to find 5 people to judge stuff instead of 3.
Yeah, I also think that it sets a dangerous precedent because there are always those whiny contestants who will always believe that they won a match no matter how badly they obviously lost the match, and they'll still complain about it. And so by not having an appeal, you're taking that out of the system.
Yeah. And then the next highly often talked about thing is that the lower levels, as we know, at least at NHRL, that if a robot is done, they have the tap out button. BattleBots does not have a tap out aside from put your controller down or, whatever the case may be. I don't know that it's necessarily a structured thing. And so I'm curious to get everyone's thoughts of the need for that at the lower level versus BattleBots, and what that looks like today, or does that need to change? So whoever wants to jump in.
I'd say every event should have tap outs, whether it's bang, bang, bang on the plastic, or a tap out button is basically just a button with a light connected to it, which is what ours is. I mean, it goes back to the computer system, so it records the time somebody tapped out. But you hit that button and a light goes off on the other side, the other contestant, and they know that, okay, stop hitting. It's a tap. Honestly, you should be able to build any even small Antweight arena should be able to build one of those, a tap out button for like $10. Just get a dumb little red siren kind of light, and put the two buttons in parallel. And when somebody hits the button, the light turns on and both drivers know to stop. There's no need to make it complicated.
Most competitions, it's necessary to some extent to have some ability to tap out, purely just for cost wise. You don't want to get your robot shredded to pieces, and even down at £3, there are some certain people that may have excess money that don't care, but there is also most of the local events, 60-70% of those people, that's a lot of money to them to have a better weight, and if there's no ability to tap out it really, and you get someone that might be hopped up on adrenaline, gets a few more extra shots in, wrecks another motor, wrecks an ESC for them, there's another bit of paycheck for them that could go elsewhere. So I think in that aspect it's definitely needed. At BattleBots, I always hear the argument of there's they want the destruction and it'll be less entertaining or whatever, but if you go to watch boxing or whatever, or even like MMA or those types of sporting events, they can all tap out. That doesn't make the matches any less entertaining just because it's slightly shorter.
100%.
Yeah, the other thing there is there's not an official tap out at BattleBots, but there is effectively a soft tap out of you stop moving, just stop driving the robot, like Ray told Gigabyte when the shell came off, stop driving. And it's the same sort of thing where there is a tap out, but there isn't. And I'd support a tap out button at every level, every competition, because I think what you gain isn't going to be that much, because for the most part, even if there isn't an official tap out, teams will recognize their opponent being done and they will stop fighting. So there's actually, I think, when it comes to a TV show narrative standpoint, the potential lost drama of actually seeing someone with a pained expression on their face hitting the tap out button versus them just pretending to drive the robot and no, it's dead, sorry. And realistically, there are very few teams on BattleBots that aren't deep in the red to do the show. Like,
totally.
Nobody's getting rich competing at BattleBots, period. Like, the sport isn't at that level yet. So if you end up going to BattleBots, it's not a case of, oh, these people are just not making quite as much money because an extra motor got torn up. It's, well, that's another good chunk of their budget for next season that's now a smoldering mess in the arena because they now have to replace those parts.
Or one less spare going into the next round. And tap out is good. It's just a sportsmanship thing. It's like I don't think we have any official rules on tap out, but every competition has it. It's save your money, save your bot for the next fight, depending on what you're going up against currently. I was in a fight at Michigan Mashup with my Beetle weight against Drummel, it was his first competition with that bot, and he got to a point where he was having trouble moving. I made eye contact with him across there, and he just told me to keep hitting him. He wanted to see what broke. So
I'm always surprised when people do that.
Where you want to, like, it's battle testing it. Like, you're not going to figure out what's broken, but like I hit him. I did a good hit. I like knocked some chunks off, made eye contact again. He's like, no, keep going. I'm like, as long as you're okay with it, I'll keep hitting your dead bot. That's fine with me. But it's like, if at any point he's like, no, stop, then you pull up and stop. It's just a sportsmanship thing. You don't, like, everybody we're all friends. Nobody wants to be like mean or like aggressive towards anybody. Like, it's any of the day, you're like, I would go and help him fix his bot after the match too, to let him go to the next round. So It's
Ray has a good point. While you were talking, he mentioned that if it's double elimination, it's not just about, saving the money for the next event, but if you're in the winner's bracket, and you tap out, you're going to the losers, but you've still got another fight, and save your robot. Don't have somebody just shred it and kill those perfectly good motors and ESCs and whatnot. God, no, tap out.
yeah, for
That's
sure.
the other thing is, if you're able to tap out, that means you're either going to be ready for your next fight faster, or by the time your next fight comes around, you're going to be in better shape. And that means a better fight, and that means more entertainment for the crowd, a better show in general, better fights, and a better experience for the competitors.
Yeah, maybe you only have the one copy of the bot, so you get a second fight versus not getting a second fight. Like budget, it's all like a lot. It's budgetary constraints. So
I think we all know also, what match this may have from last season of BattleBots this may have come from. Let's say this question may have come to the spotlight, and we can understand BattleBots being a TV show that they've got to maybe lean into the drama a bit more and have those types of things. But if there was a tap out button there, who's to say that also in that scenario, if Captain Schroeder had tapped out immediately, they may have lost a couple of extra drama shots of looking at the rubble left behind after that match. But then they can also they could have alternatively leaned into that storyline of, look how fast Riptide is taking everyone out, more than they already did. So to say that you might be losing some aspect of drama or entertainment or something like that from having a tap out button, an official tap out button, is I don't think that's necessarily 100% true.
Yeah. There's always ways to spin the storyline and to cut footage together. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And also an official tap out button helps with, if someone is, they might have a bit more, matches, you got quite a bit of adrenaline and going through your system, and at something official where you hit it, the lights change or something like that, just gives you a bit more of an impetus to break out of that and go, okay, cool. During a match, might do one or two extra things that you wouldn't when you're not that amped up, and it's just something official to be, no, it's over now. You've won. Kind of, there is no ambiguity in the, at that point.
It's not something that I've seen happen yet, but it's another situation I can easily envision is if you're in a fight and you recognize a safety hazard that's now about to occur on your robot, tap out button can prevent potentially something disastrous. And the ability to immediately stop the fight if you recognize something dangerous is about to occur to the people outside of the box could be a good thing. Look at the Lucky fight this year where the box contained it, but in a box that wasn't able to handle the explosion when Cobalt hit the underside and ruptured that nitrogen tank, which is still probably the loudest sound I've ever heard at a robot combat event. Like, that could have been very bad.
Yeah, 100%. Now, last question, because this is something that I think came up more recently. And again, Mike Jeffries, I'm sure you're very familiar with this particular debate, but the more that the sport evolves, the more innovative people get with their robots. And, we have to have these like considerations of how those rules look. Because at the most recent NHRL event, Spitfire, which is a known, previous mini bot in BattleBots, but came in as an entrant in the NHRL, and kind of this whole rule set had to be created because of it being a drone. We've seen other types of different innovations as far as things people have tried in the past, whether it be Derek Young using a net as an entrapment device, or whether it be the fact that Double Jeopardy has essentially like a projectile type of weapon. what do we do as these new innovations and things come about? Because I mean, the rules and everything have to be considered for some of these things, because it's different than what we may have encountered in the past.
I'll talk a bit on the Spitfire situation in particular, because I was pretty heavily involved in the discussions leading up to and following that. So once we found out that there was a flamethrower drone coming, it was a question of, all right, how do you even address aggression or control there? Like, damage is still damage. That's still fairly straightforward. But what is aggression and control in the case of a robot that is only ever making any kind of contact with their opponent when something goes wrong? The only thing that directly is supposed to interact with the opponent is the flame. So there's no physical contact going on. And we came up with some potential criteria where it's looking at basically whether, Spitfire is using their weapon regularly, and if they're pursuing the opponent from above and things like that. And I think we missed the mark outright. Like, in the follow-on to the event, there's been a lot of discussions behind the scenes about, all right, we don't like how that fight worked. Not the bot itself or anything like that, but it's like, this just didn't make for a good fight. It made for something that was, one of the judges described to me as it being painful to judge, because it was just not a good match. And trying to figure out, all right, what do you do to the criteria to make it so the fight is inherently going to have to be better? So there's a lot of discussions going on in that realm, but it's, do you look at things like, all right, does aggression now require direct physical contact? Does control require direct physical contact? What does that do for Spitfire? Well, Spitfire's weapon's a flamethrower, so they still don't make physical contact. Does that mean we need, for a drone to score aggression and control, they need to have some new mechanism that interacts with the opponent? Are we going to see someone dangling a fingertech beater bar below their drone and just teabagging their opponent over and over until they win the fight? I don't know. But there's a lot of different things you can look at to try and adjust it. And I don't think anyone wants to ban Spitfire, but we want to make sure when someone brings a drone, the fights are better and more enjoyable to watch, less painful to judge, and just generally make for a better event.
And less frustrating to compete against, too.
That too.
I would just say it's kind of like taking an airplane to a NASCAR show. I would not allow any kind of drone in the combat arena of RoboGames, because, like Mike said, how do you judge aggression? It's flying above the other guy. Is that being aggressive, or is it being passive because he knows he can't get hit? Yeah, I think it's a bad idea in general. Nothing against Spitfire or anybody else in personal, just one of those things of, just like NASCAR, it's a two-dimensional sport, not a three-dimensional sport. And if you add that third dimension, statistically, sooner or later, one of those drones is going to win a whole event having never been touched by another robot, because the other robot can't touch them, and then are you going to evolve the rules so now robots can have upward firing nets or mechanisms, like Derek, yeah, can he use his net against the drone? Can anybody use a net against a drone? And I just think it's taking things too far. There's so many drone competitions out there. Just go to drone competitions.
Now, to be fair, I think most drone competitions would probably ban Spitfire if they tried to use the flamethrower on his opponents.
I actually saw a video. I think it was in Australia. There was a combat drone league where they played in a warehouse with like netted off things, and people had like flamethrowers and net guns and stuff like that. So
in San Francisco, a guy, Mark Kornblatt, also tried to do droid combat, and it lasted one event because everything was getting killed, and those contestants aren't used to having their robots destroyed, like combat robots, where you walk in saying, yeah, it's probably going to cost me $5,000 before you even have your first fight. And drone people are just used to having the same drone work over and over and over again.
Just got to put a whole bunch of jumps in the arena for when there's a drone so that you can launch yourself at them.
Yeah. NHRL, you do the mini bot, but have a nice wedge on it. And you just set up for sweet jumps. It'd be sweet. But I believe NHRL does have a projectile rule. So as long as they're under 150 feet per second, they're cool in the arenas. So there are ways to combat drones if you're clever. And you plan for it, obviously, because it's going to end up being a completely different weapon setup for you.
And I would think you need a lot more space than like a 40 by 40 or a 48 by 48 arena. Drones, like I've seen drone racing where they've taken over entire 100,000 square foot buildings. And there's just no way that, you can be as exciting flying a drone in a 40 by 40 as you could in 100 by 500 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that was one of probably the biggest challenge for Spitfire from a piloting standpoint was just not hitting the walls constantly, because it is an 8-foot box and you've got their drone is roughly 2 foot square, I'd say. So there's not a whole lot of room to maneuver in a box that's got this active air evacuation system going the whole time. So you're flying a 2-foot box in a windstorm with an 8-foot area to work with. And it's like, how do you even really pilot that in a way that's deliberate?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good debate to have, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the course of time. But yeah, I mean, I hope for fans that are watching, we've definitely touched on a lot of the really hot topics that, everyone kind of wants to hear about. So if there was anything I didn't touch on, or if anybody has any thoughts on, what answers were given, please make sure that you share that in the comments, because, from how these roundtables have gone so far, I have every intention to keep doing them. So it may be something that could be brought up in the future. But, for everyone that's watching, please make sure that you, of course, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Support Combat Robotics because it's amazing, obviously, and keep watching the show. And just, thank you to everyone on the panel for bringing your insight and thoughts. This was definitely a great discussion.
Do you know what Ray has right next to his desk? I got to show you this. Like, the dude gets boxes of fan mail. Boxes. He's sitting next to me grinning like an idiot.
I mean, not surprising. Tombstone's a pretty popular robot, so
Well, Ray's a pretty good.
I mean, it's like a box.
He's earned it. He's earned the fan mail for sure.
He totally earned the fan mail.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, just keep watching, and we'll obviously see everybody next time on the show.